And here's how we're going to proceed. Our first speaker is going to be Ruth Quint. She has taken a deep dive into the history of how voting has been done over time and the ways that voters cast their vote has evolved. Ron Bandus will then discuss the characteristics of a voting system, how best to ensure voters' intent is clear and is recorded accurately, how the choices made by a voter are not disclosed, and that results can be verified, among other things. Ruth Quint will then join us again to give a brief overview of the federal, state, and county laws that provide the legal framework for elections. And then we'll hear from Yvonne Rainey and Reverend Ellison. Ms. Rainey has been a judge of elections and a poll worker for decades and has a very compelling story of what motivates her to be a poll worker. Reverend Ellison has been a poll worker as well and works with the Black Political Empowerment Project community in civic engagement and election protection. And she is also a member of the First Lutheran Church, Pittsburgh. Both Ms. Rainey and Reverend Ellison will talk about what motivates them to be a judge of elections and a poll worker and why they do this work, and walk us through the steps they take to make sure everyone who comes to vote has the opportunity to vote and is able to vote at their polling location. And finally, to bring all of that together, Amy will show us a video that she's prepared called The Journey of the Ballot that describes just that, what happens from when the ballot is first prepared, the elections division, to when you get it and record your vote at the polling place and is then counted. After the video concludes, we'll move on to our questions. So first, welcome our first speaker, Ruth Quint.
Okay, let me get myself set up here and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, that's better. All right, I'm going to give a quick historical overview of some of the many ways we have voted in the United States. When we look back at the history of voting in the United States, we usually focus on the right to vote and how that right was originally limited and gradually expanded to include citizens of all races, genders, and economic backgrounds. In this presentation, we'll focus instead on the nuts and bolts of elections and look at the ways election administration has changed over time to adapt to demographic, technological, and legal challenges. But first, what is election integrity? It's an essential part of democracy. The recorded vote must reflect the decision of the voters as accurately as possible in order to maintain a government of, by, and for the people. There is a lot at stake in elections, money and power, of course, but also the values and welfare of the country. Human nature being what it is, all of these things give ample reason to try and cheat in an election. We have always needed and will always need attention to election integrity. And you see these people standing here in line to vote in 2020 in Georgia. They're voting because they care, because it matters to them, and they care deeply. And anytime they care deeply, that's temptation to cheat. The photo that you see here is a reenactment of an election in colonial Williamsburg. In colonial and early days of the nation, election days were festival occasions with last-minute speeches by candidates and food and liquid refreshments provided by each campaign. There are some funny stories of the founding fathers learning the hard way not to skimp on the alcohol at these events. People voted publicly by voice or by standing with their preferred candidate. So what did election administration look like at this very early stage? Well, all participants administered the election, basically. All participants witnessed the entire process and could verify the final count. Participants could identify each other and verify eligibility. Every voter was both a participant in and a witness to the vote count. The challenges of this type of election, of course, are that your vote is not private and it does not scale to larger groups. We still see this type of voting in some situations, including in the Congress. People vote publicly by voice vote, and everybody knows who's who, but it doesn't scale to a larger vote. As the voting population expanded, voting methods had to adapt. In this painting of an election day in the early 1800s, we see a scene that looks a little bit more familiar. You can see the man in red is a voter being sworn in by this guy in the blue. He's an election official or a court official of some kind. So the voter is swearing that he's eligible to vote. Over here behind him, we see two clerks, and they are recording the vote. He's going to still vote by voice, and these two clerks back here are going to write it down. The man over here with the top hat is one of the candidates, and he's still campaigning in line there. So he's handing this guy his business card. Administrative changes here, voters are sworn in or signed in individually. Clerks record the voice votes, and the vote results are tallied and reported later by clerks. And new challenges include ensuring that the clerks record and report the votes accurately. In many states, at the same time, paper ballots replaced voice votes in the early 1800s with a bring your own ballot system. Bring your own ballot is a strange concept for us. Some early ballots were simply handwritten lists of candidates, and you can see this hand here putting in a list of handwritten names into a ballot box. Later, political parties began publishing their slate of candidates in the newspaper. Voters could clip it out like a coupon and take it to the polls. Paper ballots introduced new opportunities for tampering in the handling and counting of the ballots. Voters or election officials could stuff the ballot box by adding extra copies of the ticket. Just buy an extra newspaper, you've got an extra ballot, maybe you can slip it by the election officials. And election officials could theoretically dispose of votes they didn't like. The behind-the-scenes counting and reporting procedures make or break election integrity when you have ballots. So what does election administration look like with Bring Your Own Ballot? Voters are signed or sworn in individually, like in the last example. Ballots are tallied after the election over a period of several days. The challenges, like I mentioned, paper ballots can be manipulated by voters and election workers. Non-standard ballots, as you can imagine, slow the counting. And publicly visible evidence of how you voted allows for corruption and vote buying. Political agents can reward or punish a vote only if they can verify how the vote was cast. With a public ballot, employers could send observers to watch workers vote, and political agents could buy or bully voters, like the man in this whatever it is, an ink drawing. He's being persuaded by two different politicians, one on either side of him, and he doesn't look too happy about it. Parties printed their ballots in distinctive fonts, colors, and graphics, making it easy to see from a distance which ballot a voter was casting, and corruption was rampant in many places. Surprisingly, the secret ballot was only invented in 1858 in Australia, and it was often called the Australian ballot. So the US spent the first 80 years of our history voting publicly, and some states still voted publicly until 1890. At first, the secret ballot was controversial. Some people argued that it would lead to selfishness, voting for your own interest without the peer pressure of voting for the common good. Others argued that it would disenfranchise illiterate voters. The argument about selfish voting was probably pretty disingenuous. Powerful interests had been having a great time influencing the vote, and they were eager to continue. The worry about illiterate voters, though, was more genuine, and it was borne out as the secret ballot was adopted. In fact, powerful interests began to see the barrier to illiterate voters as a feature rather than a bug, especially after the Civil War, as newly freed Blacks became eligible to vote. The secret ballot meant big changes for election administration. For the first time, election officials must prepare and print and provide a standardized pre-printed ballot. And because they have to print this ballot, rules are needed to decide which candidates qualify for the ballot and how. Election officials must provide a private area for voters to mark ballots secretly. And another change is that the uniform ballots are much easier to tally. Challenges: you can still tamper with the vote, although voters can't come in with a handful of ballots since they have to ask you for them one by one. But you can still tamper with the ballots after they've been cast. And voters must be able to read in order to vote accurately. So now we're coming up closer to the modern day. Most of us here are probably old enough to remember voting with a lever voting machine. And remember that satisfying ka-thunk noise when you pulled the lever and the curtain opened and your vote was cast. It really felt like you were doing something. The lever voting machine was invented in 1890, and it's basically a bank of odometers. After you make your selections, pulling the lever advances the odometers for your own candidates. This machine was used for decades, and recently enough that I remember using it. It's probably many of you. So how do these machines change election administration? Election officials must prepare machines and provide a standardized ballot. Election officials must maintain the machines, and there's no hand counting. So that makes things easier for election administration. Vote tallies are available immediately at the close of polls. You just read the odometers. The challenges are that the machines are heavy and difficult to transport. Mechanical failures do occur and can be hard to detect and repair. How do you know if one of the odometers is stuck? You probably won't. It is still possible for elections officials to change the results because it's possible to change the reading on your odometer. And there's no paper trail if results are challenged. So there's some developments in technology, including electrical machines all over our homes. And with developments in technology, a variety of lighter and more modern voting equipment became available. These particular machines here, punch card and optical scanning machines, handle paper. They're designed to speed up the work of counting paper ballots. If you've ever cleared a paper jam out of your printer, you know that paper handling machines are not perfect. However, the paper does create a permanent record of voter intent. When optical scanning and punch card machines have problems, the problems and solutions are visible to the average person and understandable, and a paper trail is available to correct the tally if need be. And when they do work correctly, they produce a fairly quick tally. Now, you guys probably remember the election recount of the presidential election of 2000, when the punch card ballots caused a big delay and changed the results of the election. Changes for these: election officials still must prepare and provide the standardized pre-printed ballot. They must program scanners or card readers for the tally. The paper ballots are tallied mechanically and create a paper trail. Challenges are the machines must be maintained. The machines may not be able to interpret all voter input. So if you fill in your ballot incorrectly, you don't fill the circle all the way in, or if you make stray marks somewhere on your ballot, the machine may not be able to read your ballot. And sometimes human auditors may not be able to interpret all voter input either. And hanging chads are a prime example of that. Direct recording machines. If you are younger than me and you don't remember the lever voting machine, you will still remember the direct recording electronic machines that we used in Allegheny County up until 2020. Direct recording machines, they seem attractive after the hanging chads debacle because there's no ambiguity. You press a button, the machine records your vote. The machine tells you, warns you if you've undervoted or overvoted. They're unambiguous and they're very quick. But there is no paper trail for audits. The machines must be maintained and tested, and errors are very difficult to detect and correct, and they require expertise. Unlike with a paper jam in your optical scanner, the average voter cannot see what's going wrong with the machine, if anything, in fact, is going wrong. But we've always done it this way. A lot of people resist changes to election procedures and to a lot of things, to any procedures really, and may feel it's a threat to the way things have always been. But the way things have always been is changing and adapting and always striving to improve the integrity of the election process. So that's a really quick overview, and I'll give it back to Barbara, and she'll bring us to our next speaker who can talk about the challenges and considerations of the equipment we use today.
All right. So our next speaker is going to be Ron Bandis from Vote Allegheny, who's going to walk us through the components of a reliable election system. Ron.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ron Bandis. I am the president of Vote Allegheny, formerly on the board of the League of Women Voters of Greater Pittsburgh, and still very active with the league, and on a couple of other boards and active memberships in other election-related organizations. Let me get my slides shared. Always a little challenge here. Okay, and one more step. And you should be seeing my first slide now.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we're going to go through a little bit about election integrity and voting machines. So what is election integrity? So the simplest version of this would be to make sure that votes are counted accurately. But I actually prefer a somewhat broader view in which we want to make sure that the will of the people is correctly determined. Counting votes accurately involves these things, right? Capturing the voters' choices, chain of custody of ballots, tabulating the votes, producing election night results, auditing those results. But to correctly determine the will of the people also includes these other things, such as can people who want to be candidates get on the ballot, or are the rules too difficult for people who aren't establishment, for example. Campaign finance laws have a great deal of effect in affecting how voters see the candidates. Debates are something that we like to conduct at the League of Women Voters. We call them forums. Publicity, particularly ad campaigns, are like the worst way to get information about candidates. And there are enfranchisement issues, particularly there's the matter of gerrymandering, in which who belongs to what district is manipulated for the benefit of one political party in many cases. And most recently, we've certainly seen foreign disinformation. A great deal of the social media information about candidates, and particularly the disinformation about candidates in 2020 was from foreign sources. And then we have this one item that's kind of in between these two, which is voter registration. And it might surprise you to know that not every state in the United States even has voter registration. North Dakota does not. And of course, every state has different rules for registration. So do we care if you left out your middle initial when you registered, even though it's on your driver's license? Well, Texas cares. Thankfully, Pennsylvania has been better about that kind of thing. So what are the goals of elections? Now, you might think it's obvious and questioning why I've got the plural goals. So the first goal, of course, is to correctly determine the winners of the races in the election. But in addition to that, we need to convince the losers and the losers' supporters that the election was fair and trustworthy. So let's break down that word trustworthy a little bit and look at some principles of election integrity. And first up, of course, is transparency. So voters should be able to observe all the processes in the election and to understand the process, either because the process is simple or because the process is documented. Simple is better than just documented, but not every part of the process can be dead simple. In addition, a fully transparent election enables public oversight, which allows us to hold accountable not only election officials and poll workers, but also voting machine manufacturers, and to some extent, even the machines themselves. Verifiability gives voters the means to convince themselves that everything is on the up and up. In California, for example, any voter can obtain images of all the ballots in the election and conduct their own audits. We don't do that in Pennsylvania. And I just mentioned audits. So auditability is a feature that we can manually check after the election to make sure that the count was correct. Ruth, in the previous presentation, talked about the direct recording electronic machines that we used, for example, here in Allegheny County. The ES&S Ivotronic was such a machine. You made your choices on a touchscreen machine, and those choices were recorded in the machine's computer memory. Well, you can't see computer memory. You can only ask the computer's software to tell you what's in the computer's memory. And if the software has been maliciously modified, it may not report that accurately. So let's look at a few types of voting. So first up, hand-marked paper ballots. Again, in Ruth's presentation, we saw that paper ballots were introduced in the United States. I think it was 1858. So we've had these for a long time, and people say to me very often, actually, when we replaced the direct recording electronic machines with paper ballots, oh, we're going backward. We're going back to paper ballots. But it isn't backward. The paper is actually only one feature of this system. The scanners that we use to read the ballots are very different than even the scanners we had as recently as 2000. The scanners in those days only looked to see if a lot of light or a little light was reflected off the oval where you were able to fill in with a pen. And so if you made an improper mark, if you only put a check mark in there, well, that didn't change the amount of light reflected very much. But modern scanners take high resolution images of the ballots and have software that actually, even when voters do not follow instructions properly, can tell, yes, you didn't fill in the oval, but we see your check mark, we see your X. Of course, you can still make mistakes that the machine won't recognize, such as putting a circle around the outside of the oval, right? The machine will not recognize that. So hand-marked paper ballots provide a durable, not quite permanent, but durable record of the voters' choices with the voter's own marks, which we'll see is important. The voter, because it's the voter's own marks, this is direct evidence of the voter's intent. Unless the voter misunderstood the instructions, this should be a good indication of the voter's intent. And I indicated that the machine would not, for example, recognize a circle outside the oval, but in an audit or a recount, human eyeballs are now on the ballots and they will see those marks and they will recognize that. We'll also see there's a way for machines to possibly recognize that something is amiss when the voters don't follow the instructions like that. So as long as the chain of custody is maintained for the ballots, then we have good evidence of the voter's intent. Why chain of custody? Because if we have poor chain of custody, then someone may alter the ballots. And so chain of custody is required to ensure that there's no alteration of the ballots after the voters mark them. If the ballot scanner makes mistakes, then we can detect that in an audit and correct it in a recount. A lot of people advocate for hand counting of ballots. And the problem there is hand counting, are people more honest than machines? Are people more reliable than machines, right? Fatigue increases the error rate when humans look at this. And finally, of course, while it's not a requirement to have results on election night, it is an expectation. And with hand counting, you probably cannot complete the tally of the votes that night. Ballot marking devices. So for voters with disabilities or voters who simply like using this technology, depending on what county you live in. That might be a choice. We have ballot marking devices. This device looks superficially like the direct recording electronic machines. You make your choices on a touch screen. The difference is this machine does not record your choices in computer memory. It simply prints out a ballot card, which you then take to the same scanner that the voters who are hand marking their ballots use to scan your machine marked ballot. And this allows us to have all kinds of features in the machine to change the contrast, change the type size, and even to hook up additional devices. So ADA input devices, Americans with Disabilities Act input devices, so people can hold a wand in their mouth perhaps, or even use a device that sees where your eyeballs are looking on the ballot. Ballot marking devices are produce ballots that are voter verifiable, but not necessarily voter verified. So unlike the hand marked ballot, which is inherently voter verified, the ballot marking device ballot is only voter verified if the voter verifies it, right? If they look at it and make sure that it has the same choices that they believe they made. Some counties use the ballot marking devices only for voters with disabilities. Some counties, such as Berks, use ballot marking devices for all voters, and they don't have ballots marked by pens. Allegheny County lets in-person voters make a choice of using the ballot marking device or a pen. But researchers tell us that as for that verifiable versus verified issue, that most voters will not verify their machine marked ballot. So digital scanners in the precinct can tabulate both hand-marked and machine-marked ballots. And they have a feature in which if you don't mark any choices on your ballot, and I don't know why someone would do that, but I can tell you as a judge of election that it happens, and it happens more than one might imagine. The machine can warn you, you didn't make any choices. Would you like your ballot back and go mark them properly this time? Also, if you vote for more candidates than you are allowed to in a race, most races are vote for one, but there are races like for judges where sometimes it says vote for up to 3. And if you have a race that vote for up to 3 and you vote for 4, well, then we don't know which one to discard. So that's just a big problem. And the machine will warn you and give you the opportunity to exchange your ballot for a fresh one with a poll worker. Voting systems need to be resilient, which means that even when there are problems, the election must go on. So if the ballot scanner breaks down, well, we need to have a locked box with a slot in it where voters can put their unscanned ballots for later scanning. We need to keep them separate from the ones that have been scanned so we know which ones to scan later. And we do that in Allegheny County. If the ballot marking device is down, then a voter who has disabilities may need assistance. And Pennsylvania law does provide for voters to have assistance in the voting booth. If the tabulating device is wrong, we can detect the problem with audits, and we can correct the problem with recounts. E-poll books are not currently used in Allegheny County, but I do actually expect them in the next few years. This is like an iPad, a tablet, on which we check in voters instead of using the paper poll book. But if that crashes, well, we need to have a paper poll book, and you can't prepare it when the machine crashes. It had to be prepared in advance. We had to plan for that eventuality. Ballot secrecy that Ruth also talked about with the Australian ballot. Nobody should be able to prove to someone who is either trying to buy their vote or someone who is trying to coerce the voter into voting a certain way. If you can't prove how you voted, then they can't coerce you and to say, you'd better show me how you voted afterward. And, and I won't break your kneecaps if, if you didn't vote the way I want you to. The ballot must be divorced from the voter's identity at the time of casting the ballot. So once the voter is casting the ballot, it should no longer be possible to figure out whose ballot that was. And there are various means, and we'll actually talk about them on future slides. So I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. So there are two kinds of ballot secrecy. In weak secrecy, nobody can know for certain how a voter votes unless the voter wants them to. But what we really want is the strong secrecy in which nobody can know how you voted. Even if you want to prove to them how you voted, you can't. And in this way, we can thwart coercion and bribery. So some voting machine features. Some ballot marking devices, such as we use in Allegheny County, print barcodes on the ballot cards that the machine prints. And even though it also prints human readable text, the ballot scanner is going to look at the barcodes and not at the human readable text. So it's hard to call this not only a voter verified ballot, but it's hard to even call it voter verifiable, because you can only verify the text and the scanner is examining the barcodes. Of course, in a recount or in an audit, the human readable text would be used. So we do have that safety. Some machines, such as used in Philadelphia, keep the ballot cards in the exact order in which they were cast. And since there can be poll watchers in the polling station, and also there is in Pennsylvania what's called the numbered list of voters, which has the order in which voters checked in, not exactly the same as the order in which they voted. But with poll watchers watching, people can know exactly in what order people entered their ballots into the scanner, and then the scanner, in this case, maintains that order in the stacker where it keeps the ballot cards. We do not do this in Allegheny County. Some machines, again, the one in Philadelphia, the same machine does both printing and scanning of the ballots. And this is not a good thing, because it gives the machine the possibility of marking the ballot after it's been verified by the voter. So thankfully, we don't do that in Allegheny County. Hand-marked ballots for most voters is a very good thing. As Ruth again pointed out, hand-marked paper ballots give an audit trail, right? A paper trail, so that even if the machine gets it wrong, we can go back, re-examine those ballots. And as long as the chain of custody has been maintained for those ballots, and so that we can know that they have not been altered since the voter marked them, we can tell, even if the machine got it wrong, how this voter really voted. Machine marked ballots could look identical to hand marked ballots. However, that's not the case in Allegheny County. And the problem here is that since the machine is producing a ballot card that is very narrow, like 3 or 4 inches wide and very long, even from across the room, one can see that that person is holding a machine marked ballot in their hand and not a hand marked ballot. And if only voters with disabilities are using this, there might only be 1 or 2 such voters all day in a precinct. And that voter would lose their anonymity because their ballot would stick out like a sore thumb, because it's unlike all the other ballots. So a few other things. Allegheny County and all the counties in Pennsylvania perform testing of the voting machines before every election. This is not security testing, but it is accuracy testing, which is very important. For checks and balances, a properly constructed team of poll workers, right, the so-called district election board, should have members of multiple parties. There are, for example, 2 inspectors on the team, a minority inspector and a majority inspector. You just vote for inspector. You don't vote for minority or majority inspector. You vote for inspector. Whoever gets the most votes is the majority inspector. Whoever gets the second most is the minority inspector. And since a party can only run 1 candidate for inspector, they can't have 2 winners in their party. Unfortunately, these posts are often not filled with elections because very few people run for election in these things. I encourage you to do so. Very often the county has to appoint people to fill these positions that nobody ran for. In record keeping, the county provides an exact count of how many ballots they provide to the polling place, and the poll workers in that polling place have to maintain records of that exact number all day. So ballots are never thrown out. Even if a voter makes a mistake and exchanges it for a fresh ballot, we spoil that ballot, which means we make marks on the ballot that prevent the scanner from scanning it. And we put it in an envelope of spoiled ballots. Every ballot goes back to the county. No ballots are discarded. We also match the number of voters who checked in to vote and the number of ballots cast. And any discrepancy between those two numbers has to be explained by the poll workers before their records are turned in. So suitcases full of ballots cannot simply be added to a pile of ballots. This would be immediately detected. Observers in Pennsylvania, not just anybody can walk into a polling place and be a watcher. You have to be appointed by either a political party or a candidate that is on the ballot. Poll watchers can challenge a person believed to be impersonating a voter, and the judge of election determines whether the challenged person is allowed to vote. If the poll workers in the precinct can't be trusted, then 5 voters from that precinct can demand that the Court of Common Pleas appoint overseers, who again will be from multiple parties. Provisional ballots are used for voters who appear to be ineligible to vote. Sometimes in the polling place, they appear to be ineligible in ways that can be rectified when the county later examines credentials and so forth. So you might not appear in the poll book. Maybe there was a mistake made in the printing of the poll book. That does absolutely happen. The voter might not be registered in a major political party during a primary, and in a primary only major political party members can vote unless there are ballot questions on the ballot. First-time voters in Pennsylvania need to have acceptable ID. If you don't have it, you'll have to cast a provisional ballot. And if a voter is challenged and the judge of election upholds that challenge, then again, a provisional ballot will be necessary. Provisional ballots may or may not be counted. Also, if a person is in the wrong polling place, they would have to cast a provisional ballot. And then their ballot in the polling place that they were supposed to go to might be a little different than the ballot in the polling place where they showed up. And so the ballot may be partially counted, right? We only count the races that would have appeared on your ballot in your correct polling place. Provisional ballots are adjudicated by the County Division of Elections within 10 days of the election. And finally, there's audits. We used to conduct an audit of 2,000 ballots or 2%, whichever is less. This was a terrible way to do things. Pennsylvania now uses what's called a risk limiting audit, in which we audit a batch of ballots. If the ratio of candidate A to candidate B is very different from the ratio that we got from the voting machines, then we take another sample. We get another batch of ballots and we audit them. And we keep doing that until either we say, okay, we have come up with the right ratio. Our samples were just too small the first couple of times, or we examine all the ballots. And if we still have that incorrect ratio, well, then the machines must have messed up. Direct recording electronic machines, which store your choices in electronic memory and for which there is no durable record, cannot be meaningfully audited. These machines are still used in Texas and Georgia. And finally, some phone numbers. So I'm sure we'll be able to provide these slides from the League of Women Voters, but the main number here, 866-OUR-VOTE, is administered by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law and other member organizations of the Election Protection Coalition, and some of our local organizations, such as BPEP, the Black Political Empowerment Project, are members of this coalition. We also have special numbers here for Spanish-speaking voters, Asian-speaking voters, Arabic-speaking voters. We have special number for deaf voters who can use American Sign Language in a video call. We have a disability group, the Disability Rights Pennsylvania election hotline. And finally, the Department of State in Harrisburg also has an election day voter hotline. And that is it. So thank you very much. And back to Barbara.
Thank you, Ron. That was fabulous. And even though I confess to having heard it in the past as we were preparing, I'm still impressed with the scope of your knowledge and how thoroughly you walked us through the processes for running an election. So thank you. Next up will be Yvonne Rainey and Reverend Ellison, who are going to talk about being poll workers and a judge of election. And I'd like you to talk both, what motivates you to be a poll worker and a judge of elections, as well as what you do on election day as part of those duties.
Thank you, Barbara. This is Reverend Michelle Ellison, and I am going to go first, and then our judge of elections will come after me, Ms. Yvonne Rainey, and she will be answering most of the questions about what goes on at the poll, and she will answer questions from the audience. I became involved with voter registration activities at the age of 10. Okay, I accompanied my father as he went from door to door, house to house, registering people. By 15 years old, as a teenager, I became involved in community affairs in my neighborhood. It has been a long and full journey. I have served as a poll worker here in the city of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County. I became a poll worker because I wanted to be part of the election process. Beyond personally voting myself, I wanted to be part of other people voting and their vote counting. I wanted to be part of making sure their voice was being heard, their voice was being counted. We live in the United States of America, one of the democracies in the world. As a democracy, we are a nation ruled of the people, for the people, and by the people. Every voice matters. It's important to vote. As many people as possible should vote. I would that all people who are of age would vote. That is our goal. When Allegheny County Board of Elections said they needed poll workers, I responded. I went to the training and followed instructions. On election day, I arrived at my assigned precinct on time, 6 a.m., was sworn in and participated with others in preparing the poll for voters. The workday at the poll site ended a little after 9 p.m. The day was busy and long. However, the judge of elections day was not finished, as you will hear from Ms. Rainey, who was a judge of election. I would say mail in your mail-in ballot early if you're voting by mail. If you plan to vote at the poll, go prepared to wait. Rain or shine, or even if there is snow on the ground, be patient. I urge you to remember that poll workers are human beings that are trying to be as courteous as possible and get the job done to ensure that your vote counts. And finally, I'll say, if it is your first time voting at a poll, bring your ID. This way you will not have to vote by provisional ballot. Yvonne Rainey, please.
Good evening, all. It is truly a pleasure to be a part of this. And I want to let everyone know I am also a community activist and an educator for my community with the John Lewis Coalition, BPEP, and several other organizations. which is my church, Pittsburgh Higher Ground. The reason I became a poll worker, well, the reason that I'm so dedicated to being a poll worker is because of my great grandmother. I remember I was 10 years old and she went to go vote, and I was holding her hand, and they said some very unsavory things to my grandmother. And to look in her face, and she had the right to vote, and she looked down at me, and I told her, I'm going to make a difference. I am going to make a difference. She said, I won't see it, but you do that. That has been my motivation. It will continue to be my motivation. We all have purpose. And I ask people, what is your purpose? Be a part of change. Be dedicated, because it's all about us, our voice, our vote, our democracy, our right. I tell people I'm American made, Black woman, American made. And that's what I keep telling my community when I'm out there. And being a poll worker is a privilege, especially for a woman of color, a Black woman. If you go back and look at the history, you know, we were not allowed to be poll workers, but change is here, and we're a part of that change. As a poll worker, we're going back as a mother and a woman being Black and a grandmother with great nieces and nephews. This is about the future we must invest in and continue to educate and advocate and make sure everyone's registered to vote, because that is our constitutional right. We have a right to vote because our founding mothers and fathers laid down their lives of all colors and nationalities for our right to vote. What I have learned, experienced as a poll worker, I was kind of intimidated because I started as a poll watcher. And Miss Cheryl Gainey, I'll never forget, she said, you want to be a poll worker? I said, no, ma'am. She said, why not? I said, I can't do this. But then I remember what my great grandmother said, you are a part of the change. You said you promised me. And it keeps coming back up in my mind. I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want to break the promise. So I signed up, went to the training, because every poll worker must be trained. And I brought my granddaughter along. And it was so exciting for her because she was a Gen Z. But I've been working the polls for 10 years prior to her. But it was so comical because she was excited to sit there and learn the process of the democracy of voting. And she's like, this is cool. So, but the day in the life of a poll worker, especially the judge, we have to go 3 days before the election to pick up. It used to be the suitcases. Now it's a bag. Thank you. But I'm sorry. I was reading something. We have to go down to Allegheny County Board of Elections and pick up the bag. We're responsible for that. We told the Board of Election that we would be the judge. Well, I ran, I won, thank my community. But you have a big responsibility because the right to vote is precious and you got to take it that way. So that's how I take my responsibility as a poll worker. So November 8th, day of election, 6 a.m., roll call. Be at your poll. Your team has to be there. They know you said you was going to work. We're going to do this. And the best thing about it, we have to have a sense of humor because everybody's like, where's the coffee? I said, I got it coming. It's going to be straight and black. Because we got a long day and everybody start laughing. But as a judge of election, once again, that is my responsibility to make sure the poll is open on time. Everything matches from what's in the bag, which is every machine is automatic, is locked, and you have to make sure that it's a tag that's in your bag. Everything has to be exactly right. So can't be no muckety muck going on. So once we open up the machine and do everything, we get sworn in. The majority clerk swears me in, then I swear in the rest of the board. And it's kind of comical that they look at me like, this is serious. Yes, it is serious. Because every voter that comes in this door, we have to make sure they have the right to vote. And we got to do what we need to do to make sure they vote. So here it is, 7 a.m. A roll call. Let's go, y'all. Everybody start calling out, saying, okay, we're ready, let's go. And I look at them and say to them, we are a team, we're in this together. Remember why we're here, what we need to do, and what is our duties to make sure every registered voter has a right to vote. Then here we go. And it's so comical that you see some people come in, they're eager to vote. And that's why I continue to say, I would love for us to have those stickers again, that when the person, once they vote, that they voted and they get the sticker and they're so proud of it. Yes, because you're American made and you have a right to vote. But as the day dwindles, we have a duty and responsibility once again to make sure everything is in order. And when I say that in order, every voter comes in. If it's required in the ledger that they need to have their signature, we ask for a signature. Also, ID. It was specified if that is their first time voting. Also, if we have a voter that comes in and they have not changed their address on their registration, and they come to the polling site, I get on the phone and call downtown because I want to make sure every registered voter has a right to vote. This is the process that we live in, because all that other mucking him up, they talk about rigged voting and stuff, it doesn't happen, because the integrity of the Board of Election of Allegheny County makes sure, like Mr. Ron and others that's here. And I like to say to Miss Lorraine and Miss Terry and Miss Judy, I appreciate you all very much, because when I look at you, I admire the work and the dedication that you're doing. And that's why I continue to do what I do, because you're not my backup, you're my side bar, as the kids would say. And that is what it's all about. We have got to be more visual. We have to register more people. We have to get our communities the information that they need, because especially for people of color. And when I say that is, my vote don't count. Yes, it does. Because I always ask the question, do you get any type of assistance? And I'm not downplaying it. They'll say yes. I say, who do you think dictates of what goes on in our community? But the bottom line is this. It's like the football team. We've got to have the coach, the quarterback, the linebacker, and all the above. So if you look at the federal, state, and local government, those are the team. They're the team, but we are the big players. We are the big players. We're the fans. And when I say that in this sense is, a voter is the power. Voting is the power. There wouldn't be no team without us. The bottom line is, we, the people of the United States of America, we have a right to vote, and let's exercise our right. I continue to say that because whoever we put in whatever party you're from, we're nonpartisan, but we just want to make sure that you're registered to vote, you have access to vote, you understand the voting process and how it is set up. There is a check and balance for everything that goes on in the voting process. Believe you me, 13 hours in one day is a long day. And it's not about the money, it's about a dedication. And the material for voting, the material for the training, it's very, very thorough. Trust me. Before you leave the training session, you will know. If you don't know, there's someone there to ask, and they will show you. And I encourage everyone, please go vote for your family, for your community, for our future. But at the end of the day, when we close the polls and do the closing, we do checks and balance, we secure the machines, We secure the votes. We do our closing out of the machine and put the tally up in the public polling place. So no one can, you can see that it can't be tampered with. You cannot tamper with the machines. You can't tamper with the votes. All I'm saying is this, our voting system is very secure, but you have to come out and vote because that's your power, that's your voice, that's your choice, that's our democracy. And once again, I say, get out and vote. And there is several numbers that you can call. Ms. Lorraine, will you put that number back up, please, ma'am? For the voting protection. Because probably at the end
866
of,
hour vote.
I'm sorry, Mr. Ron.
866 hour
Yes.
vote. Our OUR vote.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. And it is truly a privilege to be a part of such a dynamic team that's dedicated and to make sure that every vote counts and your vote matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rainey.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis.
All right, thank you very much. Both Reverend Ellison and Ms. Rainey. Appreciate what you had to share with us this evening. I have an apology to Ruth Quint in that she still has to tell us a little bit about the legal framework for voting. And so Ruth Quint could join us again. We'll hear from Ruth.
Okay, I'm back. Here we go. Let me see if I can share my slides again. I'll do this really quickly because we're a little bit out of order and I want to get to Amy. But they asked me to go over a little bit the layers of election law that do provide the framework for our voting and shape your voting experience. A lot of times when we think about voting laws, an overview, we think about federal law. Federal law allows Congress to set a national election day for federal elections. It guarantees our basic voting rights to citizens over the age of 18, regardless of race or gender, defines the electoral college system for presidential elections. And there are some big national laws. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 bans poll taxes, literacy tests, and other practices which have historically disenfranchised minority voters. And the Help America Vote Act of 2002 was in response to the 2000 presidential election. It describes baseline standards for administering elections. Some things like ADA compliance, provisional ballots, having to have a backup method, and it also had studies of different types of voting machines and recommendations and grants in order for states to purchase new voting equipment. The U.S. Constitution then grants the state legislatures the authority to determine the times, places, and manner of holding elections. And I put an asterisk there because Ron gave me a correction, so I'll go over that in the next slide. But in Pennsylvania law sets Pennsylvania election dates and deadlines. For instance, we set our own primary, which you know is different from when other states have their primaries. Defines the voter registration process, methods and qualifications, including methods for changing or updating your registration. It requires the maintenance of a statewide registration database. Procedures for absentee and mail-in voting, including overseas military voting, sets up a closed primary system requiring party membership to vote for primary candidates and defines penalties for fraud or interference with elections. And these laws are different from the laws that you'll find in other states. In all of these cases, some states have closed primaries, some do not. All kinds of different things going on. Here's the correction. Here's the US Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1. The times and places and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing, with some old-timey spelling there, senators. And this means that Congress does have the authority to override state law. They could, for example, create a national law that said everybody votes on the second, everybody's primary is the second Tuesday in April. They could do that. But since they haven't done that, anything that they have not already defined is left to the states to decide. In Pennsylvania, just a couple of years ago, Act 77 was one of the biggest changes in Pennsylvania election law in decades. And Act 77 is best known for introducing our no excuse mail-in voting, but there were several other changes made. There was a lot, because it came in at the same time as the pandemic, there was extra confusion and extra chaos. And a lot of people thought, oh, these changes are only for the pandemic. And now that the pandemic's over, we don't need mail-in voting. But it was put in place before the pandemic came along, and it was passed with broad bipartisan support. You see there Governor Wolf at a signing ceremony with a Democrat and a Republican, and they all look very happy about this act. So Allegheny County procedures, which Ms. Rainey and Reverend Ellison just told us about, they in Allegheny County, they have to arrange polling places for 1,300 plus Allegheny County precincts. That's a lot of precincts. That's a lot of precincts to staff. They have to hire, train, and pay over 6,000 poll workers to staff precincts on election day. Design the ballots for each election, showing the proper candidates for each ward and precinct. So think about it, there are over 1,300 versions of the ballot in Allegheny County alone in every election. They arrange for the ballots to be printed and distributed to the correct precincts. They manage the mail-in process and set any extended hours, drop box, or secure drop-off locations. They purchase voting machines and scanning equipment and maintain that equipment. And they secure and count ballots after voting ends and publish the results of all votes cast in Allegheny County. So that your election experience ends up being shaped by all three levels, right down to the precinct level, really. And I was going to say our next speakers will explain that, but they already did. And thank you, poll workers. Poll workers are number one.
All right.
That's that. That's all.
All right, great. Thank you, Ruth. And to to bring it to conclusion, last but certainly not least, Amy Cleesis will show us a video that she has prepared called The Journey of the Ballot.
Thank you. Tonight, you've heard about the efforts of keeping the ballot secure. You've heard about the history of the ballot. You've learned about the laws that govern it, and even about the views of the inspiring poll workers who help cast it. I'd like to share the viewpoint of an official election ballot itself as it journeys before, during, and after an election. We find that many voters don't understand this journey. Everyone has talked about that, and I was one of those people until I worked the polls for the past 2 years. I thought it was important to share what I learned, and my sources were votepa.gov and the Allegheny Poll Worker Training Manual, which others have talked about. And I had terrific proofreaders. So let me start this up. Let's click on that.
And after you vote, follow the journey of an official election ballot to learn more. Voters want their votes to count. Secure elections are essential to our democracy. The reliability of election results depends on maintaining the accuracy and security of election equipment, forms, and ballots to ensure that all legal votes are counted accurately and no votes can be altered after being cast. But before we start, a little historical note. Voters want their votes to count, but over time, our election laws have needed to adapt and to build in safeguards in response to threats to the integrity of elections. We take pride in our history of free and fair elections in the US, but some of that history does not meet our current standards for election integrity. Election practices in the US are always changing and adapting to address equity and security. Security procedures vary from state to state, but all combine chain of custody procedures with monitoring and physical security to safeguard ballots, records, and election equipment. That's why it's important to meet me, an official ballot, and follow my 4-step journey through the election process. Step 1, advance preparation. Step 2, election day. Step 3, tallying the results. Step 4, verifying the results. Step 1, advanced preparation. Before each election, the County Board of Elections tests voting machines by running decks of sample ballots and verifying the scanned results. Allegheny County's 1,300 plus precincts receive updated lists of the registered voters in their locale, along with ballots designed and barcoded for each individual precinct. There are 1,300 plus versions of the ballot in Allegheny County alone. Fun fact about barcodes. There are 2 different barcodes. The first is needed to tally the votes on an official ballot. The barcode on the left side of every official ballot is tied to each precinct. The scanning tabulating machine reads this barcode to tally the vote. This official ballot barcode has no identifiable information tied to any individual voter, only to that voter's precinct. This barcode is simply used to count the votes. Continuing with our election preparation, all voting materials and machines are kept in Allegheny County's secure elections warehouse with 24-hour video surveillance and professional security personnel. Election poll workers are recruited and trained, each swearing an oath to uphold election laws and rights before they begin serving on Election Day. Step 2, Election Day. Each polling place is open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. for in-person voting. In each polling place, poll workers are led by a judge of elections who monitors all activities and ensures that all policies and procedures are upheld in the precinct. Poll workers check each voter against the precinct list to verify eligibility. Each qualified voter signs the poll book. A list of all mail-in ballots sent to qualified voters is posted in the entrance. Then each voter completes a paper ballot, either by hand or by using the express vote machine. Every in-person voter feeds their own ballot or express vote card into the scanning tabulating machine. These original paper ballots then remain in a locked drawer of the scanning machine. This machine is never connected to the internet or to any computer network. Step 3, tallying results. After polls close at 8 p.m., one team, including the judge of the elections and at least one other poll worker, audits and inventories equipment and voted ballots, following a defined step-by-step procedure. The DS200 scanning machine tallies are recorded on thumb drives and on a paper printed machine tape, of which there are 4 copies. Paper voted ballots are returned along with the machine tapes and thumb drives and secured with plastic tie locks in the appropriate color-coded return bags. Poll workers count and place unused ballots in their appropriate color-coded return bag, which is sealed and locked in the bottom drawer of the DS200 scanner. Each precinct must return an account for every ballot they received and document the counts in the chain of custody log. The judge of elections hand delivers specific return envelopes and voted ballots to the county elections division. In each polling place, the DS200 scanning machine, final general results tape, and final general return sheet for each precinct are posted for the public to view. In some Pennsylvania counties, when received, mail-in absentee ballot outer envelopes are checked for date and signature and then are separated from the inner secrecy envelope. The unopened secrecy envelope is kept secure until Election Day beginning at 7 a.m. when tallying gets underway. Oh, another fun fact about barcodes. Did you know that every mail-in absentee ballot outer envelope has a different unique barcode created for each individual registered voter who's applied for this ballot? Scanning the unique barcode updates an individual's voter record and means the county has received the voter's official ballot. Oh, and one more fun fact. What occurs in 37 states, but not in Pennsylvania? It's pre-canvassing. This includes tallying or counting votes from mail-in absentee ballots prior to Election Day, but not recording or publishing the votes from those ballots until Election Day. Tallying the results of mail-in ballots begins at 7 a.m. on Election Day. Mail-in absentee secrecy envelopes are opened, the barcode on the ballot is scanned, and votes by precinct are tallied. These mail-in absentee ballot results are reported to the public sometime after polls close. Tallying the results of all legal votes includes the final vote count for all in-person votes, verified provisional ballot votes, and all mail-in absentee ballot votes, including overseas and military. However, there are reasons that final results may be delayed. Remember, in Pennsylvania, counting of mail-in ballots begins at 7 a.m. on Election Day and not before. And recounts mandated by courts or by Pennsylvania law take time. Counting all legal votes is just math, not fraud. Step 4, verifying the results. Who certifies the final votes for each race for Pennsylvania? The 67 counties certify their votes for all races, and the Pennsylvania Secretary of State certifies the final votes for each race for Pennsylvania. Each county board of elections is required by Pennsylvania state law to conduct a statistical sample of a random sample where actual ballots are pulled of at least 2% of the ballots cast or 2,000 ballots, whichever is fewer. If discrepancies are found or suspected, a hand count of paper ballots can be used to verify the tally. Pennsylvania is moving to risk-limiting audits, which use statistical methods to confirm that voting systems tabulated accurately and that a full hand count would produce the same outcome. Congratulations, you've completed the ballot journey. And why is it so important to know more about the behind the scenes of our voting systems? because our elections have the built-in safeguards and security that over time have continually improved election integrity. Facts, exhaustive fact checks, analyses, and over 60 court cases failed to find evidence of widespread voter fraud or evidence that any voting systems malfunctioned that would have changed the outcome of the 2020 election. And yet, since 2020, 49 states have introduced more than 440 bills that included provisions to restrict voting rights. 19 states have passed 34 laws, making it harder for some to cast ballots. 88 of those bills in 9 states will roll over into 2022's legislative sessions. Take action. Every election counts. You count. Vote. Want more information? Check out these important resources. You can go to vote.pa.gov and search for election security in PA. You can also go to our lwvpgh.org website to see the webpage, Exploring Free and Fair Elections in Pennsylvania, under the PA Government tab. Even more resources. You can go to lwvpgh.org and to our voter resource library to find the infographic entitled 475. Investigators from the Associated Press spent months investigating every potential case of 2020 voter fraud in the 6 battleground states. They spoke with more than 300 local election officials, as well as secretaries of state and state attorneys general. Their findings? Fewer than 475 potential cases of voter fraud were identified, which would have made no difference in the final 2020 results. We also used resources from major news organizations such as CBS and PBS. You can go to vote.pa.gov to see this election security video. And remember, informed voters power America.
I cut it off a little bit. Thank
That's
you.
great. Thank you, Amy. Judy, can you restart my video?
You have to restart it.
I got a message that says I can't because the host has stopped it.
I just have something asked to restart, so I think you
Okay.
have to do it.
I just did
yourself.
that.
Okay.
You should be able to, there we go.
Okay. And do you want to invite everyone to turn their videos on and you will lead us in the questions?
Sure. For whatever reason, and I don't want to get bogged down, it won't start my video, or maybe
Oh, you were there.
I was.
There you are.
There you are.
There, and now I'm using gooder English. Okay, thank you, all of our speakers. I really appreciate the work that you did and information that you shared with us. It was really terrific. So thank you. And we had one question early on which was answered, and that was what happened, who do you call? What number do you use if you run into an issue in the polling place? And that was answered in the chat. And I think also, Ron, you read off that phone number. So I'm going to consider that one answered. We had a question from Alan that there's a New York Times article in late September about poll workers being trained to be disruptive and not do their job, but instead to unreasonably challenge voters. And did we know of whether that's happening in Allegheny County or Pennsylvania? So Ron, I don't know if you've heard of that or whether anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I put something in the chat on that. I said that in Pennsylvania, poll watchers can only come inside the polling place to observe if they have a poll watcher's certificate. And they get the certificate by being appointed by either a candidate who's on the ballot or a political party that's on the ballot. So we don't have just people coming in off the streets, and you cannot get a poll watcher certificate even with the endorsement of those candidates or parties if you're not from Pennsylvania.
But I think the question was poll workers, not
Well,
watchers.
I whose question was it?
It was Alan Willinger, based on an article in the New York Times.
She did mention poll workers at one point in there, but earlier they were talking about, I'm certain that they're talking about poll watchers, although
I see.
some people consider the people outside campaigning for candidates and such to also be poll workers. I don't like to call them poll workers. I
Mhm.
prefer to call them, campaign workers.
Right.
But so campaign workers can't just come in Pennsylvania and observe inside the polling place. So that's first of all. Second of all, even if they do get people from probably one particular political party to obtain poll watcher certificates from that party and come into the polling place and observe, unlike some states, in Pennsylvania, if the judge of election feels that the poll watcher is abusing their right to challenge voters by challenging every voter from the opposite party, then the judge of election can evict that poll watcher.
Okay.
And lastly, if a voter is challenged, and first of all, then ways in which you can challenge a voter in Pennsylvania are very limited. Pretty much at this point, the only challenge you can make is that person is not who they say they are. There's really no other basis for a challenge at the polling place anymore. And if that happens, the challenged voter does not have to satisfy the challenger that they can vote. The challenged voter only has to satisfy the judge of election. And if the judge of election believes that this is a qualified voter, then the poll watcher can jump up and down. The voter gets to vote.
Okay. Great.
Alan Willinger has raised his hand, but would everyone please turn your video on? Everyone who is willing, please turn your video on so we can talk together. But Alan has some more information about that New York Times article. Go
Great.
ahead, Alan.
Yes, I just wanted to say the article says poll workers, unless the author of the article made a mistake. It says poll workers.
Yeah, so poll workers, in the sense we mean it, right? The judge of election, the two inspectors, and the two clerks do have the right to challenge voters, but again, only on that limited basis that this person is not who they say they are. They cannot challenge them on information put on their registration. The only way to challenge anymore since Act 77 is that this person is not who they say they are.
Right. So even if there's limited grounds to challenge a voter, what might happen in that circumstance is that there's simply disruption in the polling place that distracts the judge of elections, distracts other voters, and makes it even harder for the voting to proceed the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, but this is where some group like the Election Protection Coalition, 866 Our Vote, this is where they come in, right? So if the poll workers themselves, the officials, are acting illegally, then calling 866 Our Vote and getting help from the Election Protection Coalition, which has an army of lawyers on standby for exactly this kind of thing, to help out. And they may call the county on your behalf. They may send a lawyer to the polling place and educate the judge of election if that's what's necessary, or they may take legal action. There is on election day what's called election court. There is one judge in Allegheny County. It's invariably Judge James, holds court all day, not just until like 5 p.m., but until I think 10 p.m., which is 2 hours after polls close. So if the lawyers need to go down to Judge James and say this judge of election is out of control, that can happen.
Okay. We had probably a follow-up question to this discussion about is there a security person or a police officer, a constable, someone beyond the judge of elections, perhaps with more different authority, that could physically corral or oust or remove a disruptive person?
I can speak for the constable that comes to, well, each poll should have a constable. And that constable basically removed the irate voter. But I have experienced that myself in 2 polling sites I was at. The voter comes in with the attitude and kind of threatens me, but also there's a repercussion of that voter acting out. But also I have learned, being a poll worker, period, some people would try to intimidate you, because I remember in one election, we had a poll watcher from another party, and he felt that he could walk up and look, in the register book and look at as we count each voter that comes in. I told him, no, you don't go to that table and ask no one at this table for anything. You come to me. So he wanted to say to me, well, I have a lawyer. I said, we do too. So he gets on the phone, calls his lawyer. So I gets on the phone, call downtown. Because the bottom line is, some poll watchers feel that they have the authority, that they can go and look at the books and all this and all that. And I tell them, no, you can't. We'll give you a count. And what I like to say about the voter protection group is they come in and check on us. And that's a good thing, because that's a little security for us. Because when you have new people that's new poll workers, they can be intimidated by some of the voters that come in, believe me. Because first thing you say, oh, here we go again with these people. And I'll be like, we're not having it here. We're all equal here. We all have a right to vote. These people, we're not doing that language here.
Lorraine Cross, I think you had your hand up. Did I see that?
That was me.
Ah, okay. Great. We had a question for Reverend Ellison to please describe what the election protection monitor does.
So I think
Election-
you've got a partisan election protection monitor.
No, it's not partisan. We're non-election.
Ron, Reverend Ellison was asked to answer.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Election protection monitors are nonpartisan, okay? And they go and they check to see just if everything's okay at the poll. We have a training coming up for election protection monitors. We've combined with Common Cause, and the election monitor training will be taking place on Monday at 7 o'clock, October 10th at 7 o'clock in the evening. And you can go to the BPEP, thinking here. I'm not sure if it's on the BPEP website. It may be, because we just got notified for the training. Okay. You can give a call to the BPEP office. You can go online and get that number. I don't have it. Maybe Lorraine has the number. Lorraine Cross.
This is Judy. I got a copy of that invitation to the training. I'll try to find it and put it in the chat. Oh,
Okay,
Lorraine is putting something in the chat.
Yes,
Okay.
and the BPEP election protection people monitor every election. All righty, so we have that capacity. Yes.
Great. Thank you for that. And Ron, I actually have a question for you, which was, could you explain chain of custody?
Yeah, So this might even be something the Division of Elections doesn't understand that well. But so chain of custody is similar to, right, if you watch crime dramas, as I like to, similar to chain of custody of evidence in criminal cases. We have to maintain a chain of custody of the ballots. That is to say, at any moment, there is an individual who is responsible for protecting the ballots. And that when that changes hands, when one person hands over the ballots to someone else, and they are at the same time handing over the responsibility to protect the ballots. And Allegheny County does have chain of custody forms, so that we have a record of that transfer of the chain of custody.
All right,
And hopefully that answers the question.
okay. Those are all the questions in the chat. But I know, I guess a general question I would have, and probably others, is for those of you who work the election, how do you respond, or what do you feel or think when you hear some of the stories about voter fraud, given your training and actual knowledge and experience being a poll worker?
Well, Miss Barbara, for me, I just start laughing because once you're really out there in the mix of it and you see the process, there's no way. As some people would say, oh, everything's rigged. Nothing is rigged. There is checks and balance. Like they were claiming the steal. That's a mess. That's a bunch of muckety muck. When we, the people, have a right to vote and we vote, we, the people, vote to stand. The checks and balance of our voting system is excellent from my standpoint. And when you hear people say that, I have to stand up and defend it, because no, it's not. Do you understand that there's checks and balance to everything that goes on in our democracy? And there is no such thing as stealing votes. People don't come in with a handful of votes. People can't go out the door with a handful of votes when it's time to close up do the tally for the votes. The machine, everything is a check and balance. So people need to understand that your vote do count. Every vote counts. And that's why we strongly encourage everyone to get registered to vote, go vote, please.
Yeah, my background is in, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Amy.
I was just going to say, I had two situations of people who it was very hard to change their minds. And the one gentleman was so afraid of the scanning machine, even though we assured him it was just a scanner, it was not connected to the internet. He did not want to put his ballot in the machine. And it was a back and forth. He was angry. It was like, finally, he put the ballot in. I said, can you hear it clinked into a locked drawer? But it's very hard to tell people, even if they're lying eyes, they're seeing that there's no, it's nothing connected here, and yet it's very hard to change people's mind. Another voter was just completely incensed by mail-in ballots. And she said, I can't believe anyone would vote this way. And I said, well, we post them in the entrance. The people that are voting this way, it's posted right there for you to see. But we try to counter it with rational, calm language, but you can't really go back and forth. You just, have to say, we're going to help you as much as we can. But some people's minds are made up when they come in about certain things. And it's just, as my little video shows, it's just really not based in fact. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Amy.
So Ruth mentioned, yeah, I think it was Ruth mentioned a document called 465 about have I got the number right? 465.
It's a little graphic that I did. It's called 475, but yes.
475. So this was 475 cases of voters that may or may not have been legitimate. So it's not that there is no voter fraud. But in fact, there was an organization, and I forget exactly which organization it was, but it was entirely Republican conservatives did an extensive study of election fraud throughout the United States in the 2020 November election. And they concluded that not only was there not fraud on a scale to change the national election, but there was not fraud on the scale to change any state as to the number of electoral votes that they would cast. And there was not even fraud of the scale to change a single precinct in the United States. So I'm in the information security business, right? That's my background. And we never say something is or isn't secure because it's a process. So nothing is 100% secure, but our security at this point, particularly outside of Georgia and Texas, where we no longer use machines that have no tangible record of how you voted, that in Pennsylvania, and I believe in now 48 states, we have a paper record with direct evidence of the voter's intent. And that's a very good thing, and it solves a host of problems.
And I just want to say one thing about the 475. In that graphic, only like 9 or 10 people from those different states, and it was all the swing states, were prosecuted. The 475 wasn't even the true number of irregularities. Irregularities, yes, but once they investigated them, they discounted them. So the number was very small, and that's what that graphic says. It's in our voter resource library.
Okay.
Yeah, I think irregularity is the right word. So it's not that there's no voter fraud, but there is
Right.
no massive or even at scale voter fraud.
Barbara, can you see hands raised? Are you in gallery view yourself, Barbara?
The only hand I still see up is Yvonne Rainey,
Okay, you got it right. Thank you.
but I think she could probably put her hand down. So it is now quarter.
I have something, I would like to say something before
Sure.
we end. I know it's time for us to go. Lorraine Cross, put from VPEP, put this into the chat.
Yeah.
And that is the roll to the polls that we have. And you can go on, can call 412-212-8775 or 412-434-0919 on election day for more information.
Great.
Okay.
What I want to say is majority of the voters, when they cast their ballot and the machine says you have thank you for casting your ballot, they are tickled pink. I'm telling you now. And when they see that, they're like, wow. And even with the Gen Z generation, I can speak about my granddaughter. She was so ecstatic that she voted. And that's why it's so important that we secure and make sure every vote counts and everyone's registered to vote. And the reason I say that is with my grandsons, when they first voted, we had a celebration at our household for every young person that was in our family. We celebrated because I know how important it is, and we share that from generation to generation about my grandmother not being able to vote. And all I'm saying is, if anyone that has the passion, the drive, the dedication to be out there to make sure people have a right to vote, do so. Because we all share a story and we all have a purpose.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. And thank you for that. I have heard and read stories about the time in the South where you had to take some impossible test to be able to vote, and all the work done to secure your voting rights. But to hear a personal story such as yours really makes all of that resonate to me, where no one has ever challenged me when I either registered to vote or first went to vote. So I think that's good for us to remember those stories. There is a host of information in the chat, and I think Judy will be saving it. And that includes the election protection information, some of these phone numbers we've mentioned, and our website for the League of Women Voters of Pittsburgh, and vote411.org. So, and there might be something else in the chat here. Oh, we take calls from voters needing a ride. Great. And I will just say on behalf of all of our speakers, thank you. And to those who've listened in this evening, thank you. And I hope you found it useful and that you all learned something new this evening, because I know I did. Thanks again.